Welcome back. And now, the newly amended employment equity targets set out by the Department of Employment and Labour have come into effect, aiming to further decisive action towards representation and transformation. These targets have detailed sector-specific goals that contain strict consequences for non-compliance. Different sectors had mixed reactions, and joining me now to unpack these targets further are Piet Le Roux, CEO of Sakeliga, Bruce Mcgregor, Director at Macgregor Erasmus Attorneys, and Thembi Chagonda, CEO of Global Business Solutions. Thank you so much for your time and really just the different insights that we will be getting on this topic, lady and gents. Let me start off with you, Thembi, and really the landscape of transformation in the world of work. Surely there are gaps and a lag in that agenda that have necessitated these changes to accelerate transformation in the labor market. What's your reading of where we are right now?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. So I think where we are right now is at the back of lack of transformation in South Africa. And I'd like to put a few facts before we start, just in terms of what really led to these sectoral targets to be implemented. And as you know, I sit in the Employment Equity Commission representing business, and being there for 2 decades, almost a decade rather. Okay. So what we see as facts, which led to this, is the lack of transformation. So if I can give you just facts in terms of the numbers, if you look at the first time that the Employment Equity Report was published, which is the Commission of Employment Equity is responsible for publishing. So in 2001, at top management level, we had 87% of white people, males and females, and 2023 we're sitting at 63%. The latest report is no different to this. And African males and females at 6% starting and 17% in 2023-24. And I'm just highlighting some of these. And of course, Indian people, 4% starting at 11 at where we are right now. And if you look at this senior management, similar, numbers. So that really led to a call that surely something has to change. And what needs to change is we cannot have the same numbers representing the people that are historically disadvantaged, still not progressing. So if you look at those numbers against the economically active population, which is what the sectoral targets are trying to strive towards. So the sectoral targets are nowhere close to the economically active population that ideally we should be looking at, which has been low for over 20 years. So at the back of that, I think we can all agree that there is a change that needs to take place. We need to have diversity and inclusion, particularly at the first 4 occupational levels, which are mostly the focus with these sectoral targets. And of course, we do know that since 2017, the calls for amendment of the employment equity legislation started then, and with the Department of Labour introducing the sectoral targets as of February last year. And we now have this final version, which is what has been published, which the business is saying we haven't heard enough consultation. This is not enough time for us, and these targets are quotas. But I think if one then reads the legislation, the regulation that has now been finalized, one can see that there has been some changes and there's nuances that are saying that, we can implement these sectoral targets with providing reasonable targets. And it stipulates very, very clearly in that the 5-year targets, no employer will be fined for not achieving the targets if you can show reasonable steps that you've taken to implement these measures. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. So I'm not sure if That's okay.
We will definitely dig deeper into some of the points that you have made. But Piet, I want to come to you. Sakeliga is fighting against the employment equity targets. Is the fight against the specific changes that were published last week, or just the idea of employment equity corrective policies?
We don't litigate against ideas. We litigate against concrete, unlawful and unconstitutional legislative and regulatory proposals. In this case, the litigation will be against the Act and against the regulations. The regulations, with the aid of the Act, provides for hard caps on the maximum employment that white males, in this case, may have. Incidentally, white males divides the economy into designated and non-designated groups, and the non-designated groups are white males and foreigners. So, in effect, the regulations view white males on the same par as, let's say, Zimbabweans or someone from Japan or someone from Peru, basically white males on the same level as foreigners. So we litigate against these concrete proposals because they are telling businesses what level they may employ people on based on their race and their sex. And if they don't comply, they will be fined 10% of turnover, and they will not be exempt just because they've shown they've tried. They will only be exempt from these penalties if by some fall of the minister or some regulator or some bureaucrat, they are deemed to have done enough and have reasonably not achieved this. So these regulations are not voluntary. They are quotas, they are racial quotas, and they cap white male employment to as low as 4% of companies. It is very strict, it is unacceptable, it is harmful, it is unconstitutional. We don't stand for it.
I just want to stick with you, Piet. Because the employment equity policies targeted at the greater inclusion of previously disadvantaged groups, and that's across racial, gender, and disability divides. Is Sakeliga fighting against targeted inclusion across the board, or against quotas on specific groups?
Opposing these regulations because they implement quotas. They are telling companies what the maximum number of maximum percentage of white males is that they may employ. And so that is precisely what we are fighting against.
Is it just on the racial side of things, or just the inclusion on a broader scale, including persons with disabilities and gender?
No, the main feature is the white male preclusion. The rest is ways to try and make this more acceptable and palatable. It's a way to disguise what is actually happening. But in principle, a business should not be told what the race and sexual composition, etc., of it should be. Businesses, it's a question of business freedom, economic growth, and self-respecting organizations and a self-respecting society, that we afford businesses the freedom to appoint who they want, and they should. And you will see, as we have seen, a great spread of growth in a country, but all over the history of the world, we have never seen all companies reflect the composition of the state or the world as a whole. And so this is utopian and ideological position taken by government, and it is not acceptable. Even the companies of our other two guests, if they have more than 50 employees, they will have to scale down the white males in that company within 5 years to somewhere between 4 and 20 or 30%, depending on the job level. So I'd love to know how you're going to tell these companies all across the economy that they must get rid of the white males. This is what this regulation is doing. And this is the primary objective of the regulation, and so it's useful to frame the discussion on fighting that.
All right. Bruce, I want to come to you really on the specific changes in this new amendment. What are the identified pillars here of employment equity going forward?
Thank you very much, Zinati. What Piet and Thembi have been speaking about is the sectoral targets, which are now setting fixed government-appointed targets, which employers need to strive and meet within 5 years unless they've got very good reasons not to. That is the bulk of the thrust of this. There are some other changes. I don't want to take your time dealing with issues regarding equal work of equal value, and the regulations have been now tweaked to assist that. But I just wanted to address the issue of the targets. What will happen is we've all got employment equity plans. If the Act is compliant and applicable to us, and that's if you've got more than 50 employees, for example. And what would happen is you've got a plan in place where you're telling government that from this day to this day, this is how I'm going to transform my business. This is who I'm going to bring in and who I'm going to take up to the highest levels within my business. Now, what these targets have now done is said, well, we as government are going to tell you what targets you need to meet over a 5-year plan. And the big change is really is that from 1 September this year, everyone will have to redraft their plans and have them in place from 1 September. And then over the 5 years, be able to show reasonable steps that they've taken. Now, on that point, and it's a point that Peter just has raised, is obviously we as a society, we need to get to a point where we've got as many well-educated, as many employed people as possible, because we will all want to be able to look after our families. We all want to have free time. We all want to have the resources. And it's those competing interests that are finding themselves together in this piece of legislation. Now, in a growing economy, employment equity is like a river. If the river is flowing fast with the economy growing, change can happen a lot easier. But if economy is stifled, and if there's pressure, as we're seeing coming from certain parts of the world at the moment, are putting pressure on South Africa, we don't have that growth, then we don't have a flowing river. We just have almost like a pond that's stagnant. And how do we move forward when things aren't moving? So those are just in a very brief, in a nutshell, Zanati, the main changes. Thank you.
It's quite interesting what Bruce is saying, and of course what Peter also mentioned is that we know that a high tide lifts all boats. Thembi, I want to come to you. What's your take on this? Should we wait passively? I mean, maybe not passively, but of course we can't grow the economy passively, but should this be followed by economic growth where businesses can be able to catapult the transformation agenda more easily? Or does this need to be a targeted thing as we are seeing now? And also just from this amendment, how far can that go? Do you think that it could go far enough to actually be able to produce sustainable transformation and not just ticking boxes?
So the way I see it is that the purpose of this targets are to promote equitable representation. So it's been over 20 years that we've had the legislation, and we haven't seen much change of that equitable representation when the economy was doing well and when the economy is not doing well. And if you look back in terms of opportunities that have been around, the recruitment opportunities, the terminations and all of that, they haven't really favored people from the designated groups. And then, yes, granted, the skills issue is a main issue, the experience, but there are also other factors that have impacted the transformation. So what these sectoral targets are doing, they are putting certainty of the substantial compliance, which hasn't been around for so long. So, and I think it is important to put, to make clarity of this, because I go with facts of what is written in the regulations. The regulations are pretty straightforward. They say, these are your 5-year targets. They are not intended to add up to 100%. So what that means is that, yes, when we start targeting out of 10 people that you may have in a particular occupational level, your target for designated groups is 5 people. So that means your other 5 people is either your white males or your non-designated groups, so we put it that way. So, and it's been like this for some time, but the only difference is that there have been no justifiable reasons when employers have not achieved their targets over the years. You would be asked, have you achieved your targets? No, give us the reasons, and you give the reason, then it's a rollover.
Yeah.
So the only difference now, there's certainty that you are now provided with targets that are saying, these are your targets for 5 years. Year on year, you can set your flexible targets, but what they want to see at the end of the 5th year, you must have at least achieved your target. But if you haven't, you would have had your reasonable, justifiable reasons. Business economy is one of them. When the business is not growing, it's easy to say, if you own a business, it's a family-owned business, and your transition or promotion of your family is one of the people that you need to put up in your business. You're never going to get fined for that because it's a business economic factor, because who must you give your business to? So that is something that people are not saying, are not clarifying it, because it is in the legislation. It gives you the justifiable reason. If you come to the 5th year, you have not achieved your target, and you've given justifiable reasons year on year, then you will be fine. One other thing is that every business will still get the certificate as long as you've justified. If your justifiable reasons are not good enough, that is only when you can have a challenge, because then that certificate will be withdrawn. And where we have, a bit of uneasiness is that are the people that will then be monitoring and deciding whether or not your justifiable reasons are good enough. Yeah. So that's really why we should be having your deviation process. Everything must be documented. It mustn't be something that, you just say that we didn't have opportunity, but the facts are there that you had the opportunity. It really is trying to change what used to be, I couldn't find a suitably qualified person from the designated groups, and therefore I'll appoint the person that I feel would be suitable. And one other thing I want to add before I stop is, the legislation has always given us the suitably qualified persons model, and we haven't utilized that as businesses. The suitably qualified persons model says that you may consider a person to be suitably qualified for a position if they have one or combination of factors. And what we do is that we want people that are 100% fully compliant, but most of us sitting in this call here, none of us had all the experiences from day one, and we just not giving those people the opportunities. But yeah, so that's where I'm going to end. Thank you.
Yeah, and we are actually running out of time, so I really just want to get last thoughts from you, Piet and Bruce. Piet, what has stood out for you in your kind of consultations with stakeholders here, including government? And what's the way to from here? I understand that there is legal action that you have instituted as well.
Well, what we're now looking at effectively is a form of targeted domestic sanctions, not numerical targets. It's targeted domestic sanctions against a section of the population, capping their participation in the economy and employment at different levels. It's not something like 5 out of 10, as Thembi said. Unfortunately, it goes down to under 4%, which is less than 1 in 25 of some opportunities in some categories are available in some of these sectors. In multiple, I'm looking just at the screen here, I'm seeing 10, 15, 20 categories with 20 with a maximum of 4% available for white males, and most of these range between 4 and 25% or so. So it's a massive infringement. It's targeted domestic sanctions, and I'm afraid, as much as Thembi Chagonda, Ms. Chagonda here tries to find reasonable ways of foresees reasonable excuses, there is no guarantee, and unfortunately we can take no assurance from these. We must look at the regulations and the Act, and then in the context of where the South African government is escalating these targeted sanctions and the rhetoric and the ideology, I'm afraid that when businesses should expect massive red tape and very little reasonability from the bureaucrats that eventually implement this.
And just lastly from you, Bruce, Piet is a part of the organizations that are fighting against this. How open to a legal challenge is this amendment, firstly? And secondly, Compliance and enforceability, has that tone changed with this amendment?
Zanati, yes, there certainly is an ambit for legal challenge, bearing in mind that we're having competing rights that are to be weighed up. We need to transform our economy, we need to grow our economy, and we need to give everyone an opportunity. But at the same time, we can't stifle the economy and get rid of those who are contributing, who've got skills. And that's really in a nutshell, what the courts will have to be doing. Just in regards to enforceability, the Department of Labour does enforce. I've got many matters, or our firm has got many matters where the departments are saying, Department of Employment and Labour, that there isn't compliance and they need to defend themselves. So certainly the enforceability is at a very high level at the moment. And then finally, just to close off, in KZN, we've got this saying, "Ikusasa laziwa." You know, the future is not certain, and there's some really big things. What the Constitutional Court will do, what other countries are going to do, what is the World Bank going to do in terms of linking these type of initiatives to loans. We can't control that, but what I do say to my clients is I say, you've got your business, tough times are tough. Let's get our employees engaged. Let's get our employees enthusiastic. Let's talk to our employees and get the highest productivity. We're all together in this boat, and let's go forward. So whilst all these big legal things are going, and I'm not an HR practitioner, that's certainly for me a light at the end of the tunnel. But we all work together, we all talk to each other, and there's no us and them. We're all together in this boat, and these discussions we're having with trade unions, with employees, for everyone to understand where we're going and how we're going to resolve this together, not just the employer sitting by him or herself or in a board. Together, how are we going to do this? Thank you, Zanati. I really appreciate the time. Thembi, good to meet you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the different insights, really enriching that conversation. And Bruce is absolutely correct. The future is uncertain, and we are still heading to the 1st of September. So I'm sure there will be lots of conversations to be had on this. Thank you so much for your time, lady and gents. That was Piet Le Roux, CEO of Sakeliga, Bruce Mcgregor, Director at Macgregor Erasmus Attorneys, and Thembi Chagonda, CEO of Global Business Solutions.